Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming this afternoon. It is my privilege to introduce to you Mr. Zachary Benedict, and he is the managing partner at MKM Architecture Plus Design in Fort Wayne, Indiana. MKM is a firm that has been consistently recognized as one of the top 100 healthcare architecture firms in the country by Modern Healthcare magazine. While designing numerous projects that range from senior healthcare facilities to public libraries, Zachary manages the firm's community-based projects and research efforts. His presentation will explain the challenges that are facing our growing older adult population, the limitations often imposed by the built environment, and how the way in which we understand and develop a sense of place and how it is essential to how we measure our quality of life. Let's welcome Mr. Bennett.
Hi. I don't know if you did this on purpose or by accident, but you do realize we get to spend the next 2 hours together. As we go here, and then we go next door, and I talk about something I think kind of completely different. My name's Zach. I doodle buildings for a living, so take that for what it's worth. Show of hands, how many people here work in a senior care facility? Hospital? What else?
Hospice.
Hospice, okay.
Social workers.
Social workers? Okay. Just trying to get a sense of. Can everybody hear me all right? Once I start talking, I don't stop. MKM, my firm, is really obsessed, I think is the right word, with this belief that individual well-being is essential for communities to thrive. And we spend a lot of time thinking about what that means and how we can help change that definition for individuals specifically. So we really focus our efforts on trying to design meaningful places for people. Because of that, in the office, we break up all our projects in quadrants. And we use 2 axis points, health and independence. So all of our projects fall within either community health, outpatient care, acute care, or long-term care. So everyone in the office kind of has an expertise of where they feel most comfortable. Everybody works on all projects. We're really interested in this journey through the quadrants that inevitably happens over the lifetime. And everybody's goal, I think, if not now, hopefully in the future will be, is to get everyone back into the community living independently. So even with our acute care clients, it's, well, how fast can we get them back into the community? So there's always this kind of discussion about a journey which we're really interested in. More simply put, this is where I spend most of my time. We do a lot of what we call stroller-to-stroller research in the office. And my presentation after this will focus more on this, but the idea that we've designed an entire world around an able-bodied 25-year-old egomaniac man with a car has really had some problems recently and going to get worse in the future. So we deal primarily with trying to engage these marginalized populations, kind of both ends of the bell curve, especially in this conversation of community health and well-being. So that's really where I spend most of my time. Today's conversation in this session is a lot more specific. Today I wanted to talk about the ability to explore a connection between home and identity, and then we're going to talk about how that translates into how we might think about resident rooms and long-term care facilities that love to claim being home-like. So I'm challenging that a little and seeing if we can rethink what that means. I want to illustrate the impact perception has on happiness. I'm not interested in empirical data of who's actually happy for today's discussion. I'm more interested in how that perception occurs and what changes that perception of why I feel happy or independent or with dignity. Then I want to talk about home as a system of legitimacy, specifically in a long-term care facility, talking about a resident room as a functioning home, by the definition I'll hopefully make clear today. You do a literature review, and the definition of a home is just all over the map, right? From simply saying it's a structure to this idea of personal status or influence of place of change, opportunity for permanency and continuity. It's so varied that I thought I'll make my own so we all at least are on the same page for today. Because I'm sure as soon as I'm done, you're going to litter me with questions. So to me, for today's discussion, I think in the most basic terms, home has served as a centuries-old experiment in the creation of intimate space, which we're going to talk about today. Transforming over the years from a largely public environment or mechanism to an industrial response to the romanticism of privacy. Hopefully it'll make sense here in a second. So really, in a lot of ways, it's our attempt to manifest our most personal attributes, these things like memory, emotions, belonging, into the physical world. Right? And for most of us, that's what we're unwilling to let go of. Architects have been screwing this up for years. Is there any architects in the room? I'm the only one? Okay. We've been infatuated with this idea of a human proportion. And we've done a lot of really bad philosophical writings on what home means. But we usually think of the person as a measurement. So when we say it's a human scale, we mean ergonomically. It's this tall, it's this wide, I can grab a handrail here. We have really no good idea about home as a space or human as a person. Right? We lean real close to getting out a ruler. And this will mean nothing to you, but it makes me smile, so I'm going to read it. This is a practicing architect in Denmark, and the reason I bring this up is most of you, hopefully throughout your lifetime, will hire an architect for a senior care project. And we screwed these things up religiously. And I want to get this in your head now so you know what questions to ask later when you have the opportunity to transform space like someone's home where someone actually says they live. Because I think this is really important. So historically, the field of architecture, people like me, have been dominated by two opposing extremes. On one side, an avant-garde of wild ideas, often so detached from reality that they fail to become something other than eccentric curiosities. On the other side, there are well-organized corporate consultants that build predictable and boring boxes of high standard. Architecture seems entrenched between two equally unfertile fronts, either naively utopian or perfectly pragmatic. Okay? That's our fault, not yours. But as you have these discussions about what a room looks like, how staff functions with residents, these things really come into play. This is my wife's definition of comfortable. God love her. And this, to many people, is home-like. Right? This is the realities of an everyday routine. Right? And how many of us would allow this to happen in a resident room? Right? I mean, we don't. No one does. You'd be afraid for getting in trouble for letting a room get to this point. But this is how most of us live before we're supervised. But when we talk about design or even thinking through the logistical operation of a home for someone else, they always look like this. This is the American Institute of Architects Home of the Year last year. My profession said this was a really good home. This is horrible. I mean, you should be doing surgeries on that table, right? Not entertaining guests. And this is the difference. It's an idealistic utopian response. And that's where I think we always lean when we're given the chance to design something for someone else, not ourselves. We always lean back to utopia. We always want to make it perfect for everyone. Never really ask the question, would I dare live here myself? And I mean this with all due respect. I think the intention is very sincere. We're trying to make the best, most perfect environment for residents. And we tend to take it so far that it's the farthest thing in the world from this. Right? So how do we do that? And how do we maintain that comfort and sense of ownership in my space and still be able to provide a clinical environment for residents? It's not just architects' fault. I blame John Locke, who's a philosopher that most of our founding fathers based the Bill of Rights on. Okay? So most of this is his fault, not mine. And what made America different, really in a lot of senses, and I'll even talk about it at the next session, is our infatuation with separating public and private. This was a revolutionary idea from a policy standpoint to build a governmental structure around this. The Bill of Rights, of property, of ownership. Everything else, the European model is based on the commons. We all decided what we were going to share, and if you were rich enough to find a place of your own, congratulations. America was, no, everybody gets their own thing, and if we all like each other, we'll make something we share. It's a complete opposite mentality. And ever since then, we've been constantly battling this balance between public and private. And it has fundamentally changed how this country thinks about home. Right? Our definition of home over the last 2 centuries is so far skewed from everyone else in the world, of where people are allowed to come, where strangers are supposed to stop, where I do my entertaining versus where my children are allowed to go, where I go to the restroom versus where I eat. We have all these spaces that are defined with flags on them. This is mine, you can't go. A man cave, right? What was the one on Sunday morning? Her shed? She shed? She shed. There's nothing wrong with it. But it just shows we can't segment this enough, right? Everyone has to have their own piece of spatial pie that's mine and no one else can touch. You can't tell me how to use it. Get away, don't look at me. This is mine. And this is a very different mentality over the last couple of centuries than most any other community. And it's changed the way our residents will perceive home as well. Right? They've lived this their whole lives. So to change it now is, I think, naive, but understand the sensibility of how we got to where we are. I'm trying not to overlap anything from now until later. But I'm going to talk about some things today at a micro level that I'll talk about later at a macro level. So this was what we used to call a community. People lived in a community. A community isn't a thing, like a company's not a person. Right? A community is a collection of people, collection of homes that just have to have this umbrella of a name. Right? So this was a collection of homes. People lived here. And it was an internalized system. You went to a central location to get stuff, milk, eggs, hammer, gossip, a girlfriend. You knew where to go. Right? There also was a sense of limitation, sense of resources. You would never move far enough away from downtown. You couldn't walk there and back in a couple minutes because you got groceries every day. It just got cumbersome and annoying. Right? So there was this ring of concentration of houses around these historic districts. And then when we stopped caring about that limitation of resources, a different type of house surrounded that. And you get this donut effect, where there's pedestrian-based homes and vehicular-based homes. And it's the Berlin Wall of rationality. This goes around the whole system. Because at some point, we traded this for this. Right? And I'll go into this later, but think about this specifically in terms of how your residents have perceived home across their lifetime. Right? Home no longer was a place nestled in a bustling, active pedestrian scene. It was a place where I parked my car, tried to avoid talking to my neighbor, and drive to Walmart to get toilet paper. Right? This is my experience of home now because of this. And it's changed the way we behave. So this is the real important stuff, like the rise and decline of league bowling in America. Robert Putnam did Bowling Alone, just a phenomenal book. But what it did is it categorized our attendance record and social functions over the last couple of decades and how they all tanked in the late 60s. It doesn't matter what I do. It could be VFW, the Elks. They all look this way. Somewhere in the 60s, these all go to nothing. Because we started building communities that made it really cumbersome to be involved in these activities. The inverse of this is that. It's the rise of chronic disease in America. There's a reality. There's a reaction to this trend. And I'll talk about that later. But as far as a home is concerned, I think it's equally important. Because you have to understand their correlation. So the attendance drops, not because of poor programming, poor social organizations, because the homes and communities we were designing made it too cumbersome to behave this way. So that's the kind of home we're dealing with. And where we live changes how we live. Always has, always will. Right? The home's no different. It changes our behavior. And the problem is, even those that I think are doing good work around this idea of home are short-selling what a home is. So if all you're thinking about is a home as a structure, there's certain solutions you can come across. There's technology, there's just phenomenal technologies now of making homes more adaptable to age in place. There's really amazing work going on. But they're looking at it as a physical structure. And home's a little bit more nebulous than that. Home, in a lot of ways, is kind of this Venn diagram of three things. There's social reality, built environment, which is the house itself, and the user group. And these are constantly changing. Always. Pop culture changes minute by minute, right? Preferences, color of the year, you name it, haircuts. The built environment changes, sometimes slower than, not sometimes more stubbornly than the other two, but it's moving as well. And the user groups are constantly changing, whether you're talking about rapid aging populations, the economy crashes and my disposable income goes from here to nothing. These are fluid phenomenons. The difference is where they overlap is really what we're talking about when we say home. When we're talking about what your residents are perceiving as their home for the last 60 years was a combination of these three things. And throughout their lifetime of using that home, it changed. Right? The only steady constant was where they overlapped is how I self-identify home. Right? So we have to understand that. And when you say you're providing a home-like experience, this is what you're promising, whether you like it or not. So as designers, as people that have control over operations and staffing, this is what we're dealing with. The reason I bring it up is the way cities have been developed over the last 50 years have left a growing number of citizens isolated and unable to engage the world around them. So in economic terms, we're starting to get much, much more interested in this, this idea that home is a conduit between meaning and identity. That your attachment to a place mattered, both for your mental and physical health, but also for my city's economic sustainability. So for here, I want to talk about the first part. In the keynote, I'll talk about the last part. So let's talk a little bit about systems of identity as home. What does that mean? You don't need to do anything else other than watch the first 16 minutes of Up, and you know everything you need to know about a home. And if anybody tells you there's more to it than that, they're lying to your face. It's that simple, it's that poetic, and it's that complicated, all in one 5-minute YouTube video. I couldn't get the Wi-Fi to work, but everybody's seen this movie, right? Okay. No? So now you know what you're doing tonight. Yeah, okay. And to me, we've joked about this, but I've had clients do this now. This should be orientation for every senior care resident, nurse, staff, technician. This should be 101. Because this is why people don't want to move to your facility. This is what they refuse to walk away from when they move, right? And it's not a utopial perfect picture. In that first couple minutes, it's that beautiful that transition between different phases of their life. It's not all happy, right? It's not. And that's the beautiful thing about the home that we forget when we clinicalize it, right? He still doesn't want to leave this place, even though it's real depressing right now, right? But we have to understand that it's not a utopial response. The memories and identity, how those three things overlap, is what he'd rather die or fly away on a couple hundred helium balloons than get rid of. Right? We ask this, so you see these surveys all the time. People will religiously say that they'd rather die than move into a senior care facility. And you take the same survey with those residents that have the guts to move, and all of them say, like 97% will say, I wish I had done this earlier. We all know these statistics, but this is why they don't want to leave. And we have to acknowledge that and respect it. Houses themselves come in all different types, phases, fat, thin, ugly. I just bought a really wonderfully ugly house. But the difference is, I think, to think about that structure as a shelter for, there's this great philosophical quip in kind of the literature review where homes are a shelter for daydreaming. And they need protected to be as such. I need to have permission to do that here. This is what I do in my home. And that means a little something different for everybody, but it also gives us a construct of how we can think about this when it changes context. I'm going to read this whole thing, because you can't, but I think it's important. Sorry, I don't like to do this. Dwelling defined as an ideal or a set of normative patterns for living oversimplifies and limits the possibilities for ways of living. Instead, dwelling should be considered as involving creative and complex acts. More than a sheltering of activities, it's a multifaceted phenomenon that brings together where we live and how we live, each informing and changing the other. Your creativity in dwelling is found in the ever-changing discourses that residents conduct between their physical place and their way of living. Its complexity is derived from the diversity of those discourses. Thus, the term dwelling is simultaneously noun and verb, the interaction between our places and our ways of dwelling. Okay? So to say that someone's just stuck in a room, going to watch The Price is Right all day, and that's their home, isn't cutting it. Right? We're constantly thinking about home as a place. And it is, but it's simultaneously a verb. Right? It's a euphemism for how I'm living my life, the actions of it. So what we did, we started getting really obsessed with this idea, because over half of our work is for senior care providers, is I wanted to do a backtrack research project on the history of home over the last 400 years and how they changed. And then it just turned into this big monster. But it was really, really fascinating. So you commonly hear, especially in architectural terms, the delineation between public and private space. That's always the discussion. We added into these diagrams I'm going to show you this idea of intimate space. And these are our definitions, they're not anybody else we made these in. Public space is usually defined as places that anyone's allowed to go and they don't need permission. Private space is places you would let someone come into with your permission. Intimate space is not for anybody else but you. When you're sitting on the toilet, that's not private space, right? Even if they knock and ask nicely, my 5-year-old boy doesn't get to come into the bathroom while I'm on the toilet. That's private, intimate space, right? So we're being very clear about this in terms of permission. So in the 1600s, what these diagrams show is they told me I'm not allowed to leave the mic. This is just a diagram of property I own, just for this discussion. This box is my house, and then these different shades are for public, private, intimate space. The home was about 2,000 square feet, but it took about 25 people to maintain it. It was a machine, and you read maintenance logs of servants, and on a house this size, it wasn't abnormal to have one person whose sole responsibility was soot removal on wall coverings. And by the time they were done, it was time to start again. Because we really didn't design fireplaces well until about 1750, so they just bellowed smoke into the house. So there's all these things you had to keep. It was really like a commune. It took that many people just to keep this thing moving. And this idea of privacy didn't even really exist until about 1650. These 25 people slept in a room. So think about that in terms of intimacy. One of the most common beds was the dining room table. We just get blankets thrown on it, and 4 to 6 people would sleep on the table. So this idea of privacy is a new thing. Right? It's a relatively new phenomenon. We didn't have this during the Enlightenment. I mean, you compare this to other, tangible benchmarks in human history. This just seems like it's way out of place and way late to the game. But this is what we were dealing with. 1700-ish, the Dutch came along and redefined a lot of things. One thing they introduced was the front porch. So it blurred this boundary between public and private. Now I had this transitional zone, this buffer, where you can get up in here, but if I don't like the way you look, then I have this, so there was that opportunity. We also started introducing things like the bedroom, a specific room with a bed in it, as opposed to furniture as equipment. They would just push stuff to the side when they weren't using it. So this has a designated room. We haven't got to a bathroom yet, so keep that in mind. This idea where the home got a little smaller, took a little less people to maintain, but we started to understand this separation of public functions and private functions. We slept upstairs, we entertained downstairs. Public spaces for entertaining was daylit with big windows looking out on the porch. These are all new inventions, 1650, 1660. Then the efficiency age. right, 1900-ish, we get down to 800 square foot a person, or a house, with 3 to 6 people, no servants. Right, this is the technology age. We invented things like the iron, the vacuum, right? And we started to say we don't need this many people to maintain this thing. We also started defining this in the terms of the American dream. Notice that the outdoor space now was claimed as private space. Right? That's my backyard that the GI Bill bought me, and you can't walk on it. This became a phenomenon. We moved private space outside the realm of the home, and intimate space became relatively unchanged. But we started to understand these things through like air conditioning, the mechanicalization of the home. It really changed it as a thing. That was all fascinating to me. Then this happened. This is kind of how most of America treats home now. We've moved private space all the way to the curb, and no one's allowed to walk in my yard. You know, the first suburb, Riverside, Pennsylvania, your front yard was a donation to the public realm. They treated everything between the faces of your homes as a linear park. So it was completely common to have someone picnicking in your front yard. This is the history of suburbia, right? Think about that now. Someone shows up, just flops down, starts eating in your, right? I mean, it's laughable. Because we did this. We're now putting that flag out to the curb. I own that, it's mine. And really, almost except for maybe the kitchen, the whole house is intimate. Everyone's got their own thing. She shed, man cave. Everybody's got their own place, and no one's allowed to go anywhere, ever. Right? And this has really become an outgrowth of the communities we've built. Right? And also a sign of status. Right? The more you can privatize, the more successful you must be. So think about this. The things I think are interesting here is how new of an idea privacy is. The fact that comfort as a word wasn't even invented until 1700. So this idea of that blew my mind. And the other one is to think about the fact that most of your residents start here. Right? So they saw that transition happen. Some of them rejected it, some of them embraced it. But that's really their context coming into this. So let's look at each one, just kind of interesting. There's no pictures, but you can judge a lot by paintings. So this is that first privacy realm. You can see there might be 1 or 2 rooms, but all the furniture is treated as equipment. When you're not using it, it gets pushed to the side. And they just became these kind of large machines. You can see the lady scrubbing the floor in the background. And then this idea of comfort came, largely due to the fact men stopped trying to or lost control of the home in a management sense. Right? Part of it was due to technology. It didn't take so many men to maintain. There wasn't as much manual labor required to keep a home up and running. But also, there's sources that will support my statement, but take this for what it's worth coming from a mama's boy. They just did it better. And they understood it better, and they were not shy about saying how it could be fixed. And as economic growth happened in these industrial communities, men just spent more and more time away, and they kind of adopted this as their own. But you look back, Catherine Beecher wrote a book in 1841, to give you a sense, as an operational manual of how to maintain and run a home. And she was very, very clear on her opinion of men and architects and their knowledge base when it came to how to design a functioning home. She called us idiots. And she made things that seemed like such common sense things that at the time were just almost heresy, right? From affluent populations. Everyone in the house adds to the expense. Duh. Involved in finishings and furnishings and the amount of labor spent in sweeping, dusting, and cleaning, and painting, and window cleaning, and taking care of and repairing his furniture. Double the size of the house, you double the labor taking care of it. Or vice versa. Right? Just the lady is sick and tired of doing all this for nothing. Right? And slowly but surely, that mentality kind of seeped through how we thought about home. And then this happened. The left one, I have nothing to say. It's not mine. I'm not even going to say. But my favorite part about these is, look at the one on the right. You see the dimensions? It's perfectly fit. Right? So this is an interesting time, though. Between 1900 and 1930, we go from 90% of us having in-home servants to 10% in 30 years. Literally, in the grand scheme of things, overnight, we go to a whole team of people doing my bidding, to me taking ownership of this, and self-identifying as a homemaker. This is a new phenomenon that happened, and the marketing world ran with it. And as far as a Christmas present, anyway, 1925, it's a big moment because this is maybe one of the better contributions to the death of the home by an architect. This is Le Corbusier's pavilion at the 1925 World's Fair, and the concept was house as furniture. The concept was it was a manufactured product you could purchase, as opposed to an evolving thing that happened over time, that you customized at your own will. And the reason this is important is without this does not happen. The idea that I can open a catalog and pick out my house, and within 6 months be in that house, was a really new phenomenon. And largely probably wouldn't happen if it wasn't for the GI Bill. So Levittown, which is on the right, average home was 750 square feet, had 4 people in it. And these are all returning soldiers from World War II that bought and purchased these on the GI Bill. We built what we know as suburban sprawl with that movement. But what was interesting about the movement was the marketing and consumer background to it. You literally went into, now we know it, you went into a model house. None of that existed before this. It wasn't even a thing. And then the rise, and I think eventual collapse of the McMansion. But this was the quintessential privatization on steroids. We defined success by how many things you can cram into this house. Home office, home school, home theater, home gym, home library. You must be doing really well. But now we're finally seeing, just over the last 5 years, ever since 1942, the average size of the home has increased. Over the last 5 years, it's the first time it's gone down. So we're starting, I think, to come back to reality. So that is kind of the history of the home as a structure. I'm more interested in it as a perception. This is Carl Fredrickson, my friend. And what I'd argue is one of the most flawed questions in the entire industry. This is AARP's annual question. How long would you really like to stay? How many of you would you really like to stay in your house for as long as possible? They publish the result of this question every year. And I have no sense of what worth it offers at all. I'm more concerned about the 14% that will in public admit no. The question I think probably should be, what could you do to your home to stay in it as long as possible? The fact someone would admit they can't stay in here is a totally different and I think unrealistically helpful question. The reality of the home is it has an evolving scale. So a young family buys a home in a neighborhood. They define home as the neighborhood. Now their home is the center of that universe. Don't get that wrong. But if you survey them, they define it in a much broader sense. As your independence and age changes, that ring just continually gets smaller and smaller and smaller. The problem is, in most people's communities, at some point that ring gets so small, I can't function by myself anymore. I mean, the whole birth of long-term care facilities was an outgrowth of us designing poor communities. There's really no other way to say that. So that ring gets smaller and smaller and smaller till it only circles around a recliner. Right? It does. They call it a control center. If you do these house visits, you see them. And they're beautifully engineered. So, comfortable recliner that I probably sleep in it as well. and everything's within reaching distance. Phone, Rolodex, remote control, water bottle, all this stuff's there. That's it now. That's my home. I haven't been upstairs in 3 years. My home's now to this. So we have to understand that transition, and then it's easy to understand how overwhelming it is to then go to a care facility. And not only is my control center completely screwed up, you give me stuff that I don't like. My favorite, surveys always say that no matter how good of stuff or furniture you give residents, they always claim it's worse than the stuff they own. Like, I'll pick out the most gorgeous dresser you've ever seen, drop $5,000 on this credenza, and just hear everyone complain about how it's ugly, and I wish I had my other one, and it was just a rusted out Formica counter, but it wasn't theirs, and I get that. We've known this forever with NORCs, naturally occurring retirement communities, from a sense of home and proximity. You take any older adult, transplant them into a NORC, you see 85% more participation in activities, 95% know about their community, 70% feel healthier. We know these work. And we design retirement communities when they get to a certain scale, just like a normal NORC. There's independent living, assisted living, dementia care. You have all that kind of in a village setting. The difference is we lose sight of what the real metric is. I'm not in the business of bricks and mortar. I'm supposed to be in the business of making people happy. Right? When you say you're providing a home-like experience, we're not talking about shutters or credenzas. We're talking about you're promising to provide me this. And we have to acknowledge the fact that that's how we should be measuring ourselves. This idea of sheltering of daydreams is a metric in a lot of ways. That's why I think it's interesting that the places people have fashioned for themselves are more touching than those, no matter how splendid, that others have made for them. And it's a catch-22. We're in the industry of providing homes for people. And that's not going away. But how can we do it in a way that they have control, or at least a perception of control over that environment? So I'm going to show you a case study. How am I doing on time?
20 minutes.
Nailed it. So we'll show a case study, and then I want you to tell me why this doesn't work, and litter me with questions, because I don't have this figured out yet. Just interested. I think this should be a common phrase you hear. People cannot generally be comfortable or healthy in a house which is not theirs. And that you can show all the clinical background data of when you ask people whether or not this is theirs, meaning they own an area, those that say no, the clinical results just tank. There's no deed transaction. I'm not saying there's empirical data of ownership. This is a question of perception. And remember this conflict, right? My wife versus my profession. And I'm not going to ignore, but I'm not going to dwell on it, the institutional realities that you're all going to bring up. I know there is problems with fluorescent lighting, overhead paging, monotonous furniture, shiny industrial flooring, staff uniforms, call lights, scheduled meal times, scheduled activities, shared rooms, housekeeping, smelly, soiled rooms. I'm not ignoring that. I'm saying we have to overcome those and still pull this off with some level of success. This is a project called Heritage of Fort Wayne. It's for United Methodist Homes. And it is, in a lot of ways, a fairly conventional CCRC. It's about 90,000 square feet. It just opened 6 months ago. This is a 2-story assisted living apartment building. This is a rehab suite. This is nursing memory care, assisted living memory care, back of house kitchen loading. This is 2 households of nursing. And then this is shared common civic space. Meeting room, chapel, dining room, cafe, library, you name it. In a lot of ways, fairly a conventional household model. They were intrigued with retaining their slogan that said, "Welcome home." And that's where this all started for us. I really was having a hard time saying that, knowing what their old rooms looked like. So this was the first series of sketches. We actually had to do a competition to even get this job, so this was a competition rendering. And we were okay with providing house-like aesthetics. Right? There's a difference between it looking like a house by a guy driving by on the interstate versus you promising where home starts and stops. So we'll zoom in. This is the typical household. There's 12 private rooms per household. They all share common living, dining, kitchen. And then these two households share this center common area, tub, spa, soil, everything. To give you a sense of scale, this household is 650 square foot per resident. I'm going to show you the room, and it's a little larger than most rooms. But we're under the average square foot of a greenhouse model. Greenhouse is about 700 square feet. So I'm not taking too much liberty with square footage in doing this. I'm just taking it and reallocating it in different places. Okay? So the room's a little bigger, but the public space isn't nearly as big, and we're really lean on the support space. The other thing that we were adamant about at the beginning of this process is where home is. We wouldn't let them call this a household because it's not, right? By our definition. Neighborhood maybe, right? So a house was this. That was a home. This was a common dining room. And we'll show you what it looks like. But that we, with staff from day one, had clear differences of what we were calling things, knowing that our language would change our behavior. So there was 12 homes that had a shared public space. So it's little semantics, I know, but bear with me. This is the public space. Again, very house-like. The difference is, to do these spaces well, I think you shouldn't look at homes, but you should look at parks and plazas. Every design philosophy that makes a good park or a good plaza is what makes a good civic space. And these have to be treated as civic space. It has to be large enough to accommodate a large group, but comfortable enough to sit in there by myself. Right? It's a game of fish. All park plazas are fish. You cast it, and if you get one person to sit down, everybody comes and sits down. But that space has to be small enough that that's something you want to do, and then people attract people. So there's a whole series of defensible space strategies we used in this area. The nurse station is part of the kitchen island, so this becomes a control center for staff. Everything is concealed. Again, everybody's doing this all over the country. This isn't anything real new. But you kind of get a sense of scale. So when I say the public space got smaller, this is still a big area for 12 residents. There's also a shared activity room right through these doors that for both households you can probably fit 60 people in. So there's plenty of room, I would argue. So there was all that operational issue, and then you have the issue of privacy. So the example I'm showing you here is the rehab portion. So they have their own private entrance for guests and family and friends. So they had this surge space where they could come in, but they're not coming into someone's home. I would only know 1/12 of you if I'm going to see a visitor. The other thing is we started to try to hide things. So wall sconces or nurse call lights, they're all flicked on. When the nurse call light goes off, they flicker. And everybody's got pagers. So there is no clinical looking stuff anywhere. So then we get into the room. The room's about 305 square feet. Average room's probably 220, 250. So they're bigger. But we were totally obsessed with this idea of transitional space, this idea of going from public to private to intimate, and all the science that is behind how that functions, in hopes that we can provide something that they can claim, stake a flag in a clinical environment and say, this is mine, you can't come in without asking. And this was a huge culture shock for staff. Right? All bets are off when there's a code blue, nurse call. We all understand that. The question is on day to day, the housekeeping guy does not get to go into the bathroom whenever he feels like it. Those days are over. And this was a clear delineation with staff that when this building opens, we're not doing it the way we used to do it. Architectural projects are good excuses to make new rules. They're a good time to say, when this project's done, you get fired for doing X, Y, and Z. That's a good line in the sand. So we look at it more diagrammatically. So there's this main entrance. They had, and it's small, but their own private living area. that we encouraged them to bleed out into the hallway. So everyone was also equipped with a bistro table and chair that flexes as diversified seating options during dining time. They become puzzle tables, they become where cranky people eat by themselves when they feel like it, because they shouldn't have to eat with people they don't like, even though we do at our houses. So this idea of permeable space, it's private space in the fact that I can shut the door, but it's semi-private in the fact that when I'm feeling sociable, I can leave that door open, or I can sit out on my porch and interact with staff or other people. I have the ability to control that aperture with the world around me. Private space. So this was the big one with nurses, is the head walls actually here, which I cannot see from the front door, which makes you nervous and them happy. Right? And the verdict's still out yet if they like this. We're doing a post-occupancy research project right now. But what we liked about this was the threshold. This transition is where all staff have to ask for permission. They have to get a verbal cue that they're allowed to come. And if the answer is no, they get out. The only way they go back in is if nurse call gets pulled. So this is a totally different way of thinking about allowing them the dignity to control and claim space. And it's not luxurious, but intimate space then is the restroom. Meaning this kind of serpentines back into the fact that I should be able to get out of bed and walk to the bathroom naked without anyone seeing me. I think that's a fair request in my house. So, right? So, I mean, thinking about it in those terms, I can do that with, this is a pocket door. That door can just be tanked open. And I can do all this all day long. No one's ever going to see me. It's my space. So we started thinking about that in those terms. So it looks kind of like this. I mean, it's really just a hotel room. I mean, we're not doing anything. It's not rocket science, but here's this redefined space there, which is a semi-public realm. It is the control center. We encourage residents to bring their own control center from home. We'll dock it right here. I, on my architectural plans, have a space for you to move and relocate your control center from your house. So right there, we're starting at least with some level of comfort and familiarity. The other thing about that control center then is I can watch TV. I can also see my bathroom, but I also can see out my door. That John Wilkes Booth scenario where you have your back to the door, that makes everybody nervous. It's like floor plan 101. So let them back up to a window. The private realm, this idea of a room with visual connection to the bathroom, but also private space. Then that idea of intimate space, which we all know what a good bathroom and a bad bathroom functions like. The other idea is this idea that this is the time to rethink your policy on possessions. And some are pretty liberal about it, some are pretty sticky about it. You'd be surprised. The other one we fought and lost on this project, and I'm still mad about it, is we pushed really hard to allow the families to pick paint color for every room. Why in the world this is an issue is beyond me. You're talking about $75 worth of paint. The only reason you won't do it is because your maintenance guy yells too loud. He doesn't want a whole bunch of extra cans of paint. And our comment was barcode the color and throw it away. If you need to touch up something, you can go to Lowe's and they'll scan it and you get the exact color. We thought that would be a great way to go into a model room and then the next day it's, I don't care what color, blue, fuchsia, salmon. You had control. We let you pick everything. We've even talked about everyone you have rooms of abandoned furniture that you give away to residents. We make them set it up as a model room. They treat it just like going shopping for furniture. Pick what you want. We'll move it in your room. It's just a hospitality culture on that first day that means everything. So really what we're doing now, they've moved in, they've been in for about 6 months, and we're waiting probably another 6 months. And they have 3 facilities. This is the only one with this model. So we're going to try to do some post-occupancy research on the resident mix, use of drug use and falls and all kinds of different things. But so really what we've been focused on is talking about home as the ability to claim space, the idea of permissible use of a space. And I think that's something everyone can do no matter the room layout. This idea that happiness is based on memory and experience, and I'll spend a lot of time talking about that at the next one. You'll know it when you see it. And this idea that home and the convergence of those three things is our only way in this environment to offer legitimacy to a resident. And the second we break that relationship, you don't get it back. The second you walk into the bathroom without asking for permission, and I'm sorry does not cut it. Right? That's no longer my home and probably never will be ever again. So it has to be, I think, treated with that level of severity. Questions? Okay. What did I miss? Why won't this work?
What about the fall? Like,
Yeah.
the fall, I mean,
People fall.
nurses, do they complain about not being able to see patients? Or
That was the fear.
alarms?
I don't have any empirical data yet that it's a problem. That was the fear. Someone falls on the way to the restroom.
What about alarm systems
Yeah.
and that kind of thing?
Yep.
And pads on the floors and
We got a cost to do the low voltage alarm pad in that transitional space between the bed and the toilet, and they chose not to spend the money. It was just a cost thing. The conduit in the ground is there, so we can wire it at a later date, but they won't do it. They won't do that. That's probably my biggest fear/interest in this next study, is to see,
fall rate.
because and I had complete sympathy for them. That was the nurses' biggest, and they hated me for it for 3-4 months. I mean, they did, and I totally accept that. It's a catch-22. Now we've had another client who has just a totally different mentality on risk and health, but that she makes everybody sign a waiver and says they're going to fall. That's
Yeah. Well,
they were going to fall at home. Right?
Right.
It's just now when they fall, I'm here.
right.
So we have a friend in Denmark that does senior living, and he gave a presentation, and he showed a dementia garden, and all it had was a mound of grass, maybe that big, no fence, no alarm, no nothing like we do. And the first question somebody asked, well, what happens? Aren't you afraid they're going to get out? And his comment, he was just completely baffled. He goes, I mean, we're way faster than they are. I mean, just a sense of mentality. I mean, there is something you have to accept a certain level of risk if you're willing to call this a home. You just are. That's the trade-off.
You have falls at home as well. And
Yeah. So no, it's not a hospital. But that is
you have falls at hospitals too.
that's my fear. So ask me in 6 months. Yeah.
What happened to the mini kitchen?
No one uses them. All anybody cares about is a place for ice cream. That we do a lot of freezers. We don't do kitchens in nursing environments. We do full kitchens usually in assisted living facilities.
Wasn't this assisted living?
No, that room was nursing.
Okay.
That's full-blown nursing. Assisted living would have a full kitchen. We treat assisted living like spunky, independent people that just like getting checked in on every now and then. The only one we don't, it depends on the owner on assisted living, is they waffle back and forth whether they should have stovetops. A lot of them will do ovens, but they don't like stovetops as much. Now, there was an oven and stovetop in that common area for that nursing. It's switched with a lock cabinet.
Do you have the dementia? Do you accept dementia patients?
They had a secured wing that looks just like this.
No. So do they accept any dementia patients on that unit though?
No,
Okay.
but they will. Their dementia wing was only 6 and 6. It'll fill up yesterday.
Yeah.
So that'll be my next phone call. So
So the privacy thing is like, can that dementia person say, you can come into my room,
right,
like when they enter, and if they don't respond, are they going to still be able to enter
Right.
their room? That kind of thing would be a concern.
the first complaint we got was the dementia people are never in their room.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to go in there when they're not?
Right.
Oh, I don't And when they come back and you're in the room,
All right.
that kind of breaks the whole deal we promised.
Exactly.
And they're never in our room. So that was the first question we got, which I thought was a brilliant question. And I don't know the answer to that one yet. Yeah.
Was this a replacement facility?
No.
Or was it a brand new?
It was for a large campus that had two smaller satellite campuses, and this was their newest satellite campus. Their home base has 700 beds. This had 60.
Is there like a morning check to make sure everyone's okay, or if you don't want
A what?
Answer, like a check in the morning, or can they just say, I don't want to get up, I don't want anybody in the room until noon?
What we decided was that they would do like a morning breakfast call and just hide that as a check-in.
So they have to respond.
Well, they have to decline food, right? So you kind of, we started literally in the architectural planning process, started figuring out excuses of interaction. And that's what we're looking for. It doesn't look like I'm checking on you because I don't trust you. I'm required to feed you. Do you want food? No? Okay, sorry, Bill, I'll leave you alone. But that was kind of the good morning interaction. Same with meal times are a good spot. They have to offer activities. And that's why we were adamant about that. I mean, don't lose sight of the fact I can annoy you if you're sitting here as a staff member. You're free game there. So if he was sitting there watching TV, I can be annoying. I can check in on him and bug him throughout the day and ask how he's doing. And that wasn't the deal. It's back here. The other thing about this room is it's got two TVs in it. There's one here and there's one on this wall. So if I want to watch TV and nobody bother me, I do have a space for that. But most people sit here in their control center and staff can watch them. You're just giving them an opportunity to escape. But when you know they're escaping, you got to be more diligent about checking back.
Staff can watch them, so the door's open.
It's up to them. It's up to the resident. Yep. What we found is most don't care. Even ones that are really private, they retreat to the corner, but nobody bothers to shut the door. I mean, so we had a couple, but if you visit now, most of the doors wide open. Okay, thank you.